already done Bereshit, which means in the beginning. We've already done Bara, which means created, or he created. And then we did Does anyone here speak Hebrew?
Kind of. I can read Hebrew.
Okay, all right. I'm not an expert at all. I'm learning. Okay, so don't. Yeah. I'm glad no one here actually knows what they're talking about. Okay, and then Elohim was the word we did last time, and that gets translated as God. And we looked at if you want to go back and watch that, I think it's online. We looked at some of the issues with translating that as God and how much we lose about what is in that word in the Hebrew. And so this week we are on that word right there, the fourth word. And you say that et. Everybody say et. Et. Okay, so that's an easy one, right? But it's a really fun one. And you probably know some stuff about Aleph Tav. So maybe some of this will be review, but that's okay. It's still going to be fun because this is a really fun word. It's one of my favorites. Okay, et. And it's spelled Aleph and Tav. And it's not translated. Look back here. See how each one of these has an English word underneath it and how that one doesn't? Okay. It's not translated. It serves a grammatical purpose. No, thank you. Okay, it points to the direct object of the sentence. And for those of you who haven't taken English in the past 12 months, direct object is the thing being acted upon. Let me show you. In the sentence, there's an action. In this sentence, the action is the creating. Direct object is the thing being created. Okay, so the action is happening to something. And so this is pointing you towards the action is happening to those things. That it's not God being created, it's God doing the creating. Okay, so that's the grammatical purpose of that Aleph Tav. But does this word serve another purpose? Because we have been learning in Hebrew that rarely are things just one thing. Let's look at the two letters that make up this word. The first letter is the Aleph. That's the first letter of the Hebrew. Remember, first. Stick that. First letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The paleo is a ox head, so you can remember kind of the concepts that go with this letter are strength, power, leader. Okay, ox, power, strength. The other letter in this word is the tav, and that one is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, remember last letter. Okay, and the paleo for that is an X like that, or a cross like that. It gets, as over time, it kind of does this. Then it turns into the T, okay, because it makes the same sound in our language, T. The A did the same thing, that ox head did the same thing and turned into our A. So you can see how this is going to evolve into other languages. But the concepts that go along with this are a mark, like X marks the spot, a sign, a seal, to make a covenant. Okay? So that first letter was strength and power, and this letter is make a covenant. Okay, that other letter was the first letter of the alphabet. This one is the last. So when you put those together, you have the strength of the covenant. And if you go online, you might have seen this. This is somebody else's. I did not make this. Where you have the paleo aleph, which is the ox head here, and the paleo tav, and then you see how similar that shapes in this look like those, and that it means strength of the covenant, and that it would be a letter picture of that is pretty cool. And then they put this with, I am the first and I am the last, and besides me there is no God. Now, knowing this is the first letter and that's the last letter, you can start to see how the language has all these layers to it, and you can just keep going and going and going. And we're going to go a little bit tonight until he stops me. Okay, so this whole first and last thing, we've heard that before. when you read in Revelation, right at the beginning, John hears a voice, and he turns around and he sees in the middle of the lampstands one like the Son of Man. Then he passes out, and this guy comes along and lays his right hand upon him, his right hand. For those of you who have been here, we're talking about right and left, physical and spiritual. He lays his right hand upon him and says, "Do not be afraid, I am the first and the last." In Greek, the Alpha, Omega, first, last. I am the living one, and I was dead. Behold, I am alive forevermore. So, when you look at this Aleph Tav word, and you look at its position in the first 7 words, and you think of the word as a lamp. Remember who said that? Okay. The lamp, the menorah. Let's have each of these 7 words correlate to a branch on the menorah. We have the first and last standing in the middle of the lampstand. Okay, so we have a little picture of this thing that John is seeing. And I want to go further with John in just a second, because I think he really, given what he had experienced and seen, and then what happened with him on that island, I think there were some things he understood, and that's why his book is so full of meaning and difficult to understand compared to the other Gospels. So to review, we have the Aleph and the Tav. We have the first letter and the last letter. We can think of these as containing everything from Aleph to Tav. In English, we would say from A to Z, which means everything, right? So these contain all the letters from which all the words are constructed. And these words in the next few sentences in Genesis are going to be used to create everything in the beginning. Okay, so with that in mind, and also with keeping in mind that John saw that event, he saw the man in the middle of the lampstands when he was on the island and he got the revelation. And also, and I don't want to get into a big debate about this, but I suspect that Revelation was actually written before the Gospel of John. The dating kind of overlaps. And given what he then says in John, I would not be surprised if it was. I'm not saying absolutely, and I'll fight with anyone about it. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if the Gospel of John was written after Revelation. So keeping that in mind, let's look at what he wrote in the beginning of the Gospel of John and compare it to our first 7 words that we're learning. Okay? In John, I'm going to put John over here, and our first 7 words I'll be revealing right here. So John, in his Gospel, says, "In the beginning." And that was our first word, in the beginning. He says, "In the beginning was the Word." There's the word. From Aleph to Tav, from A to Z, all the letters. Okay. And the Word was with God. Do you see where our word is in this first 7? It's next to God. Okay. The Word was God in the beginning. He was in the beginning with God. He was in the beginning with God. You see how this is being constructed, and John's words are kind of reflecting this? And all things came into being by him. So now we've got our created word. And what did he create? Everything. Apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. We've got the heavens and the earth. Okay, so now we've got our first 7 words of the Bible here, and we've got the beginning of John. Then he says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." Okay. So when we look at our Aleph Tav, I think we're getting the idea that this is symbolic of someone in particular. And yes, it serves a grammatical purpose. It points to the direct object of the sentence, and it also means strength of the covenant, but does it have another purpose? I'm going to propose that this also is a direct object pointer to the workings of Jehovah concerning his covenant. Okay? At critical moments in time, when blessing or the covenant is going to go one way and maybe not another, or be restored to someone. And let's look at a couple examples of that. In Jacob and Esau, there's a whole Bible, there's websites, and then there's a whole Aleph Tav Bible that highlights every time this word appears. And I didn't know quite what to think of that at first, but you can explore it. Here's a couple of instances where I think you can see that this is pointing to the workings of Elohim regarding his covenant. Jacob and Esau both have this Aleph Tav symbol in front of their names until you get to Genesis chapter 27. After this, the symbol only appears in front of Jacob's name, not Esau. So, does anyone know what happened in Genesis chapter 27? Just off the top of your head. Come on. Genesis chapter 20. What happened?
What chapter?
Chapter 27. What happened?
27?
What do you think happened? Just guess.
Hand over the birthright?
That is when Jacob did the hairy arms, went into his dad, got the birthright. Okay? And so the birthright passes to Jacob instead of Esau. And so Aleph Tav no longer appears in front of Esau's name. In fact, in Genesis chapter 25, a couple chapters before, Moses writes, Esau despised the birthright. This is why he's losing it. But if you look in the Hebrew, it says Esau despised the Aleph Tav birthright. Now there's another place, excuse me, in Ruth. In the book of Ruth, her name is in there 12 times. The first 10 times, she does not have an Aleph Tav in front of her name. But then the last 2 times, she does. So what do you think happened between the first 10 times her name is there and then the last 2?
She was married to Boaz. It was kind of kinsman redeemer experience.
After she's redeemed by Boaz, now she has the Aleph Tav in front of her name. Okay. So, you okay? You guys okay? Should I stop?
No, you're good. That's awesome.
Okay. All right. So here's our first 7 words again. And that's the one we're looking at today. But look, there it is again. Right down there. So let's do 2 words in one day. Okay? Okay? Okay, there it is. But do you see how it's a little different? Okay, there's an extra thing in front of it. See that right there? That little thing's called a vav. We're going to talk about that a little bit, okay? And it's stuck on to the front of it. It means something when you stick it on there. Okay, did you notice also that one has a word underneath it, an English word, okay? And. Okay, that one didn't. Okay, so the vav stuck onto the front of any word means and. Why the vav? Why do we use a vav to mean and? They don't have a separate word for and. They just do that, and it means and whatever. The vav, if you look at the paleo, is a tent peg, and it's got this idea of putting things together, like a nail puts boards together, connects things, adds, so that's why you would use it for and. This and that, something added to something else, right? Does that make sense now? All right, if you look at this, see all those tent pegs? This is a tabernacle in the wilderness. I know it's like got an A-frame thing going, but that picture I found had the tent pegs showing the best. I guess. Anyway, so here we have the heavenly, the tabernacle, being attached to the earth with vavs. Okay, vavs attaching the heavenly to the earth. Look at our vav. It's attaching the heavens to the earth, where it's placed in our sentence. Vav also means nail, and you might have seen this online, right? The yod hey, vav hey, behold the nail, behold the hand. Is everybody familiar with that? I don't need to go into that. Just remember that that's a hand. So we're going to get into that in just a second. So here we have this Aleph Tav sacrifice, restoring the connection between the heavens and the earth, okay? That connection between us and him, restored through a sacrifice in which Vavs, nails, were used to put the Aleph on a Tav. Are you following me? Okay, so the only thing really missing from this picture is a hand, right? Nail through the hand. Okay, we've got the man, we've got the Aleph, we've got the Tav. Okay, this, and don't ask me, this is a little random because I understand nail and connect and add and, but it also is man. Just follow me here. Okay, so let's look at, let me back up. No. Okay, look at that second one where we have our Vav, our nail. We have our power, our strength of the covenant. And we are going to take apart the Aleph right there. And we're going to find hands on the Aleph. They'll do this sometimes where they take the letter and it's made of other letters. So they break it into little pieces. And so your Aleph is made of a Vav right here, just a sideways line. A Vav is just a line. And then these two little, they look like apostrophes, connected, are Yods. That's another letter. Okay, so we've got the Yods and the Vav. Okay, so I want to take this now, and we talked about the Vav, the tent peg, the nail, or the man. Okay, so here we have our Vav. Okay, and let's think of this as, I was going to say nail man, but I thought, let's call it not the pierced man, let's call it the pierced one, because we all know who that is. That's our connector between heaven and earth. Okay, the pierced one, and connected to him are those Yods, or those hands. And Yods are not just hands, but it also means deeds, what you do, because you use your hands to do things. So, remember, one of the meanings for this letter is power. Okay, so I think that this pierced one with the hands connected gives us a little picture of power and how that works. And what we want to consider is what hands, a nail, and a man have to do with power. And unfortunately, no one was here when we talked about Simon just a few weeks ago. Well, you guys were. You were here for Simon, right? The magician? All right. Because I think Simon had it all wrong. Now, should I cover this or should I skip this? Am I going too long? What time is it?
You got about 6 minutes.
No, we're going to cover it. We're going to skip that. That's what Simon thought was going on with the hands and the power. That's the emperor.
I'm kidding. I'm sure you've seen the internet meme. It's pretty funny stuff. Sorry.
Okay.
I apologize.
We'll skip that. That with those pieces. Those pieces add up to 26. And for those of you who have been following numbers, so does that. That adds up to 26. And we're having to skip all this good stuff.
Oh, you want to just take over tonight?
No. No.
Actually, very quick, what you just did with the Aleph, does that also work with the original Hebrew? In the pagan Hebrew?
I haven't seen it done like that, no.
I just wonder.
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. No? Because those are more, then you'd have hands stuck to things. So I don't know if that would work. Okay. Here's our two words again. In our first 7, remember Hebrew reads that way. I put an arrow on there to remind you, that way. Okay? Now, I want you to look at, in the sequence of these words, where those fall, and kind of what that pictures. Because you have an Aleph Tav coming from God, going back to the heavens, coming again, pierced, to reign on earth. Okay, so maybe a little prophecy in the way things are ordered there. Second time, first time, not pierced. Second time he comes and they see all those, that one. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, every eye will see, even those who pierced him. And then one little last thing here, and I'll be done, is if you take these words and each of them, you do a timeline with them, 1,000 years, 2,000, and so on, the first Aleph Tav first appears at the 4,000 year mark, and the second one appears at the 6,000 year mark, the one who's pierced. I don't know.
There's actually a really good teaching on that from the parties. And they take the Aleph, which is a symbol for God, and they say that 6 of the 7 letters, so everything but Chashamayim, has Aleph in it. And so in the first 2, it's the 3rd letter back, and it's the first 2,000 years where God is concealed in time, and then the next 2,000 years when they get the covenant and the tablets on Sinai, the Aleph is the first letter, and he's revealed for the next 2,000 years. And the last 2,000 years, he is in between concealed and revealed, as the Aleph is the second.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Yeah. That's it.
Well, delightful. Fantastico.
That's supposed to clap. So now we are getting started here in the book of Acts chapter 13. So we have been at this for a little while, but we are rolling into chapter 13 tonight, which has got some amazing stuff. It's been an amazing journey so far in the book of Acts. I have really enjoyed this, and I hope you have too. So we're going to jump right into Acts chapter 13 since we've got quite a bit of reading here, and I want to read the whole thing all the way through, Acts chapter 13. So if you have a Bible, if you need a Bible, let me know. Doesn't matter. It's on the screen. I know it's a little bit smallish. I apologize. I will read in my most stentorian voice. Are you ready? All right. In the Antioch congregation were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Shimon, known as the Black, Niger, yours might say, Lucius from Cyrene, Malachem, who had been brought up with Herod the governor, and Shaul, or Paul. One time when they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said to them, "Set aside for me Barnabas and Paul for the work which I have called them." After fasting and praying, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. So these two, after they had been sent out by the Holy Spirit, went down to Seleucia and from there sailed to Cyprus. After landing in Salamis, they began proclaiming the word of God in the synagogues with John Mark as an assistant, and thus they made their way throughout the whole island. They ended up in Paphos, where they found a Jewish sorcerer and a pseudo-false prophet named Bar Yeshua, Bar Jesus. He had attached himself to the governor Sergius Paulus, who was an intelligent man. Now, the governor had called for Barnabas and Shaul and was anxious to hear the message about God. But the sorcerer Elymas, for that is how his name is translated, opposed them, doing his best to turn the governor away from the faith. Then Shaul, also known as Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit, stared straight at him and said, "You son of the devil, full of fraud and deceit. You enemy of everything good, won't you ever stop making crooked the straight paths of the Lord? Behold now, the hand of the Lord is upon you, and for a time you won't be able to see the sun." Immediately mist and darkness came over Elymas, and he groped about, trying to find someone to lead him by the hand. Then, on seeing what had happened, the governor trusted, astounded by the teaching about the Lord. Having set sail from Paphos, Shaul and his companions arrived in Perga in Pamphylia. There, John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem, but the others went on from Perga to Pisidian Antioch, and on the Sabbath they went into the synagogue and sat down. After the reading from the Torah and the prophets, the synagogue leaders sent them a message saying, "Brothers, if any of you has a word of exhortation for the people, speak." So Shaul stood, motioned with his hand, and said, "Men of Israel and God-fearers, listen. The God of this people Israel chose our fathers. He made the people great during the time when they were living as aliens in Egypt, and with a stretched out arm he led them out of that land. For some 40 years he took care of them in the desert, and after he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he gave their land to his people as an inheritance. All this took about 450 years. After that he gave them judges down to the prophet Shemuel. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Shaul ben Kish, Saul, the son of Kish, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. After 40 years, God removed him and raised up David as a king for them, making his approval known with these words: I found David ben Yeshai, the son of Jesse, to be a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want. In keeping with his promise, God has brought to Israel from this man's descendants a deliverer, Yeshua. Now, before the coming of Yeshua, John proclaimed to all of the people of Israel a baptism in connection with turning to God from sin. But as John was ending his work, he said, "Who do you suppose I am? Well, I'm not, but after me is coming someone, the sandals of whose feet I am unworthy to untie." Brothers, sons of Abraham, and those among you who are God-fearers, it is to us that the message of this deliverance has been sent. For the people living in Jerusalem and their leaders did not recognize who Yeshua was or understand the message of the prophets that they read every Sabbath day. So they fulfilled that message by condemning him. They could not find any legitimate ground for a death sentence. Nevertheless, they asked Pilate to have him executed. And when they had carried out all the things that were written about him, he was taken down from the stake and placed in a tomb. But God raised him from the dead. He appeared for many days to those who had come up with him from the Galilee to Jerusalem, and they are now his witnesses to the people. As for us, we are bringing to you the good news that what God has promised to the fathers, he has fulfilled for us and the children in raising up Yeshua, as indeed it has been written in the 2nd Psalm. You are my son, today I have become your father. And as for his raising him from the dead, to return to decay no more, he said, I will give the holy and trustworthy things of David to you. This is explained elsewhere in another passage, you will not let your Holy One see decay. For David did indeed serve God's purposes in his own generation, but after that he died, and was buried with his fathers, and did see decay. However, the one God raised up did not see decay. Therefore, brothers, let it be known to you that through this man is proclaimed forgiveness of sins. That is, God clears everyone who puts his trust in this man, even in regards to all the things concerning which you could not be cleared by the Torah of Moses. Watch out, therefore, so that this word found in the prophets may not happen to you. You mockers, look and marvel and die. For in your own time I am doing a work that you simply will not believe, even if someone explains it to you. Now as they left, the people invited Paul and Barnabas to tell them more about these matters on the following Sabbath day. When the synagogue meeting broke up, many of the born Jews and devout proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who spoke with them and urged them to keep holding fast to the love and the kindness of God. And the next Sabbath day, nearly the whole city gathered together to hear the message about the Lord. But when the Jews who had not believed saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy and spoke up against what Paul was saying and insulted him. However, Paul and Barnabas answered boldly, "It was necessary that God's word be spoken to you first. But since you are rejecting it and are judging yourselves unworthy of eternal life, why, we're turning to the Goyim, the Gentiles. For that is what God has ordered us to do. I have set you as a light for the Gentiles, to be a deliverance to the end of the earth." The Gentiles were very happy to hear this. They honored the message about the Lord, and as many as had been appointed to eternal life came to trust. And the message about the Lord was being carried throughout the whole region. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the women God-fearers of high social standing and the leading men of the city, and they organized persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from their district. However, Paul and Barnabas shook off the dust of their feet against them and went on to Iconium. And the Talmudim, the disciples, were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. Fascinating bit of kit there, huh? Now, I want to just ask briefly, and I don't want you to go into any great depth, but what are a couple of things that jump out to you in this section as things that are just curious, things that you have questions about, things that you might even have observations about, things that you think, what in the world does that mean? What is happening there? Just anything that you want to throw out there. There's a good chance we're going to cover it. And if not, I want to, if we have time. So what do you notice here about these things that is very interesting to you? Jared? What sticks out to you the most?
I've been watching a lot of like ministry to Jews, and they just recently dedicated the temple, the altar, the temple on the last day of Hanukkah. Did you see that?
No.
Yeah. So they just dedicated the temple altar for the third temple, and that starts off with one of the Sanhedrin members, and he's just like, we believe that Messiah is coming, Bar David, and they're like, and he's not going to be Yeshua. He's like, we would rather go back to Auschwitz than to change our religion. We'll never change. And like,
It's tragic, isn't it?
it broke my heart, and like, it's just been passed down.
Yeah, fascinating. And you know what? That's a very keen and interesting insight. I had not heard that. I'm going to have to look into that because you figured that would be the talk of all of Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's I think that the Vice News channel is ridiculous nonsense. And yet they have made this little program about why the Christians love Israel. It's because of end time prophecy, and we're just using them to fulfill our messages about Jesus. That's the only interest that we really have in Jews, is that they have to be there in order to be destroyed so that our Messiah will come. And that's a horrifying thing to say, and yet it is a common perception. Is that's the only reason that they're there, is to raise up this third temple so that the Antichrist can come in, slaughter everybody, Jesus will return, and we'll be golden. That is a tragic, tragic perception of what is happening, and it's very true, unfortunately. Anybody else have questions about just key little bits in this before we jump in? Things that you find fascinating? Okay? It's all good. You can be shy. At least for now. All right, so I want to briefly just tell you that this is... I apologize. There's a woman back there trying to get my attention. What do you got? What do you got there, sister?
Well, just like the last chapter and the ones before, there's hands everywhere.
There's what?
Hands.
Hands. Oh, yes, you are correct. Yeah, we noted that last time, that there's a lot of the work of hands and hands doing things. What do you see there?
Oh, well, just one little thing is the comparison, like we had talked about before, between when Saul or Paul lost his sight
Yep.
and this magician.
Yep.
There's some similarities and there's some differences.
Right.
Some of it has to do with hands.
Right.
Others have to do with whether the eyes were actually covered with something or not.
Mm-hmm.
Veil. And also one saw light, one was blind, and the other saw dark.
Right.
And well, didn't see. And one was led by the hand to his healer, and now this one, after he loses his sight, is looking for someone to lead him by the hand.
Absolutely. Excellent insights. Excellent insights. So those are awesome insights that we want to get into. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I just wanted to say that it is at this time that we have the gospel message really is leaving the land of Judea, Palestine, if you want to call it that, although I don't. Galilee, the region of Samaria. So this is the first missionary journey of Paul when he and Barnabas are traveling to Asia Minor, which I don't know if you're up on your map skills, but that is modern-day Turkey. There are no Muslims at this time. This is entirely Greek city-states. In fact, somewhere along this coast is what is considered to be the ancient city of Troy, with the Athenians versus the Trojans, the Trojan horse story. The Greeks had long ago settled all of Asia Minor, so this is all Greek city-states, and they are traveling all throughout this area on our first missionary journey outside of the land of Israel. And this is where we do start to run into in chapter 13 here, we do have the gospel beginning to spread outside of the synagogue for the first time. And then in the next chapter, we have it definitely spreading outside of the synagogue. And it's quite fascinating to see what the differences are and how that plays out. Because here they go to the synagogue and it's filled with Jews and proselytes and God-fearers. These are people who are already worshiping the God of Israel in one way or another, whether they have fully converted to Judaism or whether they have not yet made that final push towards circumcision and baptism, or they're just not interested in fully converting, but they are God-fearers. And then the whole city comes together. But then in the next chapter, it's like purely Gentile, and you note what the differences are, where all of a sudden they're bringing bulls and goats and wanting to sacrifice to Paul and Barnabas as Zeus and Hermes. Very, very different response. And it shows you the differences between the people in the synagogues who are already worshiping God and the Gentiles en masse who are fully pagan. And you'll see that repeatedly. It's quite fascinating. But the first thing that I just want to point out is that you note that there are literally 16 different cities called Antioch. There literally are. This is because this entire area, after the dissolution of the empire of Alexander the Great, was ruled by the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus. There were 4 or 5 of them, and Antiochus IV is called Antiochus Epiphanes, which you have heard of him. We just got done celebrating Hanukkah, which is talking about how he desperately sought to completely destroy the Jews and did a pretty good job of doing it too. So that was probably the 3rd Holocaust. We're about to have a 4th Holocaust with the Romans coming up in 70 AD. There will be multiple Holocausts. The Jews have been slaughtered throughout history. Slaughtered and hated throughout history, and it's not any different now. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is from a temporal perspective as well as from a spiritual perspective. So just note that this is the capital city called Antioch on the Orontes in Syria. That is the seat and the capital of the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus Epiphanes, and all these other places, in order to honor Antiochus, named their cities after him. So this is Pisidian Antioch, and this is Antioch on the Orontes. This is the seat of what will later become the Gentile church. This is where it is situated. This is like the headquarters. And you noted previously in chapter 12 that this was the first place where the believers in the Messiah Yeshua were called Christians, or Messianics, however you want to interpret that in that passage. Now, they had to travel by ship, and just a cute little historical tidbit, which I always enjoy bringing up. Ship travel was incredibly inexpensive in those days, incredibly dangerous, but really cheap. It's like mass transit. It's like a city bus. There are no state apartments. You're not getting a place to sleep. You have to bring your own food. You will most likely find yourself sleeping on top of cargo or on the open deck. If there are any accommodations at all on that ship, they are for the captain and the crew and the first mate. That's their deal. So you can get on it with a cheap fare, and you can just, as long as you can find a place to sleep, you can go on a ship. There are no passenger ships. Those do not exist. These are just for the purpose of trade, but you can hitch a ride for pretty cheap. But note that, and this will pick up later on in Acts regarding some of the storms that they had. Shipping was extremely limited in the fall and in the spring during the rainy seasons. And you always kept to the leeward side and just basically hugging the shoreline. We are not yet in that period of history where people are just ready to go off into the sunset and traverse across the oceans. You're basically hugging the shoreline. You're getting out away from into the currents. You got to get out far enough but where you can still maybe see land or you know that it's there, but you just get out a ways and then you just hug the coastline going as best you can. But it's incredibly dangerous during those times of the year, and shipping basically comes to a standstill in a lot of ways during those times because it's so dangerous. And we'll read more about that in coming chapters of Acts. Note also that one of our characters is a native of Cyprus. Do you remember who that is? It's Barnabas. Barnabas is a Levitical guy. He's from the tribe of Levi. He is a Jew who is from the tribe of Levi, and he's a native of Cyprus. So it's likely that they're on his home turf now. I'm assuming he's probably leading the expedition. You know, he's got Paul in tow saying, this is my stomping grounds. You know, I know where everything is. So just imagine in your mind that Barnabas is actually leading the expedition at this time, just because they're on familiar territory. And they're going to go with this Roman proconsul is the governor of this island of Cyprus. And so I want to deal briefly with spiritual jargon and real service, because you can see that we have a little section here right at the very beginning that says there are teachers and prophets in Antioch. Now, what is the difference between a teacher and a prophet? Now, in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, we don't really have a lot spoken regarding teachers. Who were the teachers in the Old Testament? The prophets were definitely teachers, very much so, but they would be more itinerant. But whose job was it in the Old Testament to teach people beside the prophet? Because the prophet has a kind of a specific office in those days. Yeah, absolutely, right. And they're getting either a direct revelation from God or calling the people to repentance. They seem to have a very specific mission in the Old Testament. But definitely teaching would be one of those things. But who was the teacher in Israel during the Old Testament period?
Would that be rabbis?
Well, there weren't any rabbis at those times.
Was it the 70?
The 70 elders, well, that would eventually become the Sanhedrin, which would be the ruling body, with the ones who would crucify Jesus and try to persecute Peter and Paul and such. And a lot of people don't realize this, but actually it was the job of the Levites to teach. It was the job of the Levites to actually teach the people. And you can see that in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, when they come back from Babylonian captivity and they find a Torah scroll buried somewhere, and they begin to read it and they begin to cry, going, oh my gosh, we've lost this for so many years and we had no idea. And then it says that the priests and the Levites moved throughout the crowd to help the people to understand what Ezra was reading from his platform. So they are the teachers, and that was their job. If you look in the book of Leviticus, it tells you a little bit about the Levites' job as teachers in Israel. But in the New Testament, it changes a bit, because in the New Testament you do have teachers that are called teachers. Now, you've probably heard them called prophets, elders, and rabbis would be around at this time. These are people who are attached to a local congregation. It would be a rabbi in this time. Later on, when Paul writes to Timothy about the hierarchy within the assembly, he would talk about pastors, teachers, elders, deacons, those types of things. Those are positions that someone takes within the organization to teach and to lead a local congregation, but they're in a fixed position. But a prophet and a teacher in these days are incredibly similar. Very rarely will you find a prophet in the New Testament going around predicting the future or doing miracles like you do see in the Old Testament. It's very different. In fact, a prophet and a teacher are very, very similar in the New Testament writings. And the only real difference seems to be that prophets have a higher office. They are itinerant. They are going around. They have a higher honor in the community. These are like specialists who I don't want to say that they have the Spirit of God, because that might lead you to believe that the teachers and the elders and such don't have the Spirit of God. And I don't mean that. What I do mean is that these guys who are prophets seem to have a special calling and a special anointing, let's put it that way, to go around and share their message with congregations all over the place. And in that sense, they are itinerant. They're most often seen to be interpreting scriptures in the light of Yeshua. And you will see Paul doing that, where he's interpreting all those, when he gives his big dialogue, which is remarkably similar to Stephen's dialogue just before he got stoned to death. You'll see him beginning to interpret these passages from the Old Testament prophets and seeing Yeshua in them. That seems to be the biggest factor that you see in these New Testament prophets, is that they have an ability to interpret Old Testament prophecies with Yeshua as the subject of the prophecy. Saying, you have always read about David and how he said, you are my son, today I have begotten you, and stuff like that. It was talking about Yeshua. And so they're basically interpreting the Old Testament in the light of the Messiah Yeshua. And it makes sense that they would do so, because Yeshua himself said, you read the books of Moses because you think that in them you have life, but they are the books that testify about me. And we've talked about this before, that we really need to base our faith not on presupposition, because Grandma told me, or I went to Sunday school one time and somebody told me that Jesus was the Messiah. That's just supposing it to be so. I'm saying you need to have a reasoned argument regarding, why do you think that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, it's because all of the Old Testament prophets say he is. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about when he's preaching his message here. To people who know the Old Testament, they know those passages, and he's interpreting it for them in the light of the Messiah Yeshua, pointing out that all these prophecies are about Yeshua. That seems to be the key thing about a prophet in the New Testament. Now, I'm not saying that you won't find a prophet, maybe predicting the future or doing a miracle, but what I am saying is prophets and teachers, very, very similar in the New Testament. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's rock and roll. So teachers are attached to the local assembly, rabbi, pastor, elder, and such. Now, it says that they were ministering to the Lord and fasting. Now, we think of ministering to the Lord as like, I'm going to join the ministry. What do you think of when I say ministry, joining the fellowship, I'm going to be a minister? You think I'm either going to do what?
I think of helping ministry.
That's a great insight. I like that. A lot of people, when you say ministry, means I'm going into Christian full-time ministry. I want to earn a living serving Jesus somehow, whether that's as a traveling missionary. I want to be a music minister in a church. I'm going to play the guitar and sing up in front of the church. That's ministering before the Lord, right? That's not what it means at all in the Bible. That's why I put spiritual jargon. That's spiritual jargon, okay? That's our modern 20th century perception of what Christian ministry is. Because when you look at what it actually says in the Greek, it says liturgio. That is that word ministry. It simply means to take up the office as a volunteer, at your own expense as a volunteer. That would be like, well, somebody's got to be somebody's got to be the leader of this little fellowship right here. I never wanted that to be me, and I don't really consider myself to be the leader of this thing. It's just my house. And so you come to my house, and I couldn't just have you sit here and just chat, so I got to lead some kind of conversation. I took it upon myself. Nobody laid hands on me and anointed me. I just decided somebody's got to talk. It may as well be me, because I like talking. And that's why you got to weigh carefully the things that I say. People who like to talk often say stupid things. Is it true? Absolutely. It's true. So you watch don't believe what I'm saying just because I'm saying it. You just take everything that I say and you look it up. Be Berean. Whatever I say to you, you say, hey, that sounds great, but I'm going to prove and see if you're right. So that's what it means to minister to the Lord, is to take up an office as a volunteer. Now, the only thing that I want to point out to you is Christian ministry versus serving in place. And I think this is a part that has become lost, that gets lost in the shuffle. And I think that we downplay this so much and to our detriment. Frankly, when I say serve in place, what I mean is, are you a plumber? Then you should be God's representative to the plumbing industry by showing up to work every single day, showing up on time, doing your work with a good attitude, doing your work completely, accurately, honestly, and with a good attitude. Because I have mentioned to you before how many plumbers out there that are not doing those things. They might do the job halfway. They might forget that feces goes downhill. That's a plumbing joke. I apologize. But what I want to say is, people are not aware that they are called to be servants, in most cases, exactly where they are. Paul says it in Romans. He says, if you don't seek to change, serve where you are. If you are a wife, a mother of children, I'm not saying you shouldn't work. Work if you want to work. But if you're going to work, then work. If you're going to work at home, work at home. That's a serious, serious job. Raising children and being a homemaker, that is some serious business. Now, I know, unfortunately, we don't take that too seriously in a lot of cases. I'm not kicking women under the bus, but I will kick all of us under the bus. What about as husbands? I have mentioned this before, and I know it gets me some looks, but I'll say it again. If your wife can replace you with a paycheck, you're not a husband. You're a paycheck. What does it mean to minister to the Lord? It means to be what you are to the best of your ability in the power of the Holy Spirit and be an example to the people around you. If people can look around you and say, my goodness, you are an amazing plumber. I've never met anybody as nice, as kind, as dedicated, as diligent, as hardworking, as honest as you. That's what you have to be. You have to be that way as a dad. It's like, I've never seen anybody interact with their kids the way you do. I've never seen anybody love their wife the way you do. I've never seen a woman, honor her husband because he's worthy of being honored the way you do. How lost is that in today's world of religion? Almost completely lost. Terrible tragedy. That, my friends, is ministering to the Lord. Because doing what he says to do, that's when you minister to the Lord. You don't have to go and sign up for some Christian Bible school and become a minister, become a teacher, become a pastor. Man, you could be so much more effective by raising godly children, by being a leader of your house, by being an example in your community, in your workplace. So powerful and so forgotten. This is what it means. Sorry? Dislodging from the soapbox? Any comments, questions, or concerns about that? Did I kick some people under the bus? I apologize. Fasting and prayer. It says that these guys were getting together and fasting and engaged in prayer. We have spoken previously about prayer, and trying to kind of work through how really crappy we are at prayer. How we've talked before about, if you find yourself trying to pray in the morning and you're praying inside your mind and your mind is wandering all over left and right, then maybe you ought to write down your prayers. Maybe you ought to speak them out loud. Maybe you ought to go into a closet in the bathroom, I don't know, and speak your prayers out loud. I literally do that. I don't speak my prayers out loud because I would be disruptive of the people around me, but I write my prayers. I literally write them down. Just, they're coming right out of my mouth and I'm writing them down on my phone. Or in your car is a great place to do it. Instead of turning on the radio, turn it off and talk to God as you're driving. That's not to strike. They haven't passed a law against that yet, as far as I know.
Not yet.
Not yet, but you know it's coming. No, but seriously, being engaged in prayer. Who was raising their hand? Angela was. I apologize. Go for it, girl.
I think we've talked about it before, but for the longest time I thought prayer was like almost like that list you made for that guy in the red suit.
My wish list for Santa Claus.
I got a bunch of And if you're saying your will be done, then it's all,
Yeah.
that wraps it all up right there.
Sure.
And then what prayer becomes is instead of like a wish list or a begging, it becomes just you aligning yourself with his will, whatever that means.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've talked about this before, and I don't want to go too deep into it because we've talked so much about it before, but what I will say is Rabbi David Aaron has a rather fascinating teaching on YouTube that you can read about the difference between Christian and Hebrew prayer, which I just recommend that you take a look at. I don't agree with everything he says, and you shouldn't. You know, anybody you listen to on the internet, whether it's a Jewish rabbi or a Christian minister, keep your mind open, keep your eyes open. If you hear some nonsense, it's probably nonsense. But it's an interesting thing because, and I recommend that you look at the Amidah prayer, if you haven't already, the 18 benedictions. It's such a tremendous difference between Christian prayer and Hebrew prayer. And the Hebrew prayer is really, really similar to the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples. Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Very, very similar to Jewish prayer. Whereas Christian prayer is like she was talking about, with just a list of things that I need and I want. And I'm not, please don't hear me say that you shouldn't bring your wants and your needs to God. That you absolutely should. But if that's the gist of it, you're probably off the mark a little bit. I think that you need to spend some time in your prayer acknowledging who God is and what he has done, what his promises are. I, unfortunately, throughout the years have noted that many of my brethren are not even really sure what the promises of God are. How can you believe the promises of God if you don't know what he has promised you? I mean, we know clearly, every Christian knows that Jesus has promised us eternal life. And that's fabulous, and that's a tremendous living hope for the future. But what about now? Does God offer help now on this planet? Absolutely he does. But if you don't know what those promises are, you can't call him out on those promises. God, you said you would do this, because you see so many of the biblical characters, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, basically calling God on the carpet and saying, Father, you said you would do this. Where are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? God is totally okay with you calling him out and saying, I remember you said this. Is it true? Are you going to do it? And he loves it when you do that. I know it sounds presumptuous, but it's true. So fasting, though, is something a little different. Dude, has anybody in here ever really fasted? Yes, I'm certain that you have. Jared, you fast?
I might do.
Good for you. It's a lost tradition, a lost art, if you will. It is in the Bible. It's very common in the Bible. It's viewed incredibly highly in the New Testament times in the first century. The Essenes were fasting all the time. The Jews were fasting every Monday and every Thursday. So and you know, in biblical times we see people generally fasting because of a death, because of great tragedy or tribulation, or as an act of repentance. However, it's kind of become a little bit different by this time that we're reading about. It is seen as a way to connect spiritually with God. And now I want to read you a little quote that comes from the Apocalypse of Elijah, which is one of these apocryphal works from that period between the Testaments. It says that it, meaning fasting, releases sin. It heals diseases. It casts out demons. It is effective up to the throne of God for an ointment and for a release from sin by means of pure prayer. This is the perception that these people had regarding fasting and how it would draw you closer to God. Now, of course, there's a whole section just before what I quoted here that says if you're just fasting without prayer, you're wasting your time and you're not doing anything. Intense, fervent prayer combined with fasting was seen as a way to receive visions, as a way to transcend into the spiritual realm. That's some serious business. And I know very few people who have actually taken their spiritual lives to the point of being willing to deny the flesh in order to activate the spirit and open the spiritual ears. Now, I say if you intend to ever, do some fasting, use wisdom. Use wisdom. If for health reasons or something you shouldn't do it, then don't do it. And you don't need to go without eating for 40 days and 40 nights like Moses or Jesus did. You might, and sometimes fasting can be from sexual activity. It could be fasting from alcohol. It could be fasting from just a certain meal throughout the day. It's not necessarily always, I'm going to stop eating, period, for this period of time. It's not always that. Yes, sir.
Do you have any biblical examples of anything outside of fasting from food?
Aside from fasting from just food, I do not.
Okay.
I do not. No. Well, aside from possibly Daniel, who is seen in some rabbinic circles as fasting from the pleasures, which is considered meat, wine, and oil, and that's what he withheld from himself from Nebuchadnezzar's court, that he decided to eat vegetables, and so that was his way of fasting. So that would be the only example that I'm aware of off the top of my head. Okay. Do you know of any others?
No, I don't. I just hear that all the time.
Sure.
And so I was wondering, if we're pulling that biblically, or we're just taking a principle and applying it to other areas.
Good point. Angela, do you have something?
Tracy has brought up, I can't do it justice because she's done all the study on that, but when it says this is not the fast that I desired.
In Isaiah 58?
Yeah, she has done a study on the bigger spiritual meaning around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is bigger than just a food issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Perfect.
Is that in Elijah?
What's that?
That last...
The apocalypse of Elijah? That is not the prophet Elijah from the Bible. That is called... It's an extra biblical little piece of writing from just before Yeshua. It's called the Apocalypse of Elijah. It's an apocryphal work.
It's HMC's Charles Worth. He does huge books and gets together from the old and new pseudographs.
Yeah, and you can find it easily online as a PDF. It's really similar to what we were talking about the other day with Epiphus. So there's that. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Yes, sir.
Now on the fasting, wouldn't it also be where I've heard some stuff where back then, sometimes when they fasted, they would actually go out and help. They would go out and find widows and find homeless children, and that was a part of getting connected, doing things good for the community.
Right. And I would say that is right in line with Isaiah 58. It was what Angela was talking about. That, and we've talked before about the heavy Jewish tradition of the synagogue and the rabbis, especially after the destruction of the temple, where that it is heavily focused on charity and prayer. So that is definitely a rabbinic tradition. But even before that, I think that you can see that. In regard to Jared's question previously, consider also Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, where he says, sometimes it's okay you separate from your wife sexually for the purpose of prayer. So I would say that might be an example of a fast from that. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I heartily recommend that you not do that. I'm kidding. A whole day. No, I'm kidding. Now we go to proconsul and magician and Paul. Fascinating stuff. Am I running out of time? I'm doing all right. You guys hanging in there? All right. You cut me off at any time because I literally have enough material to go until tomorrow morning. And I will. No, I won't. I'm just kidding. My alarm's going to go off. It says, "Hey, wrap it up, buddy." All right. So Sergius Paulus is curious, and I know that you see that in the text that he calls for Paul and Barnabas, like, I'm curious about hearing about this thing. And you might say, what does he know, and why is he curious? Well, I think it's just you got to recognize that in spite of the fact that they didn't have the internet, newspapers and such, news travels fast. What is the likelihood, do you think, that people from Turkey, from the area in Turkey, have heard about this guy from the region of Galilee and Jerusalem who is going around raising people from the dead? For 3.5 years, 3 years at least, unless you follow Michael Rood, it's 1 year. Seriously, I mean, that's some big stuff. That does not happen very often in history, where some guy is like hearing from God, and he's raising people from the dead, and he's healing lepers and causing blind people to see, and in fact, he himself was raised from the dead. This news is spreading like wildfire all over the Roman Empire. And I think Angela would probably know this, but why is news so easily spread through the Roman Empire? Why is that?
Because they built great roads.
It's exactly the truth. Because the Romans were known for building fantastic roads, which is not something that anyone had done previous to that. So that news can travel much more quickly. It is the first World Wide Web, the Roman road. It's absolutely. They literally built roads of cobblestone that were like 20 feet wide. That's a pretty unusual. And they're still there.
Oh yeah, in Netherlands also.
The Netherlands probably has some. In Belgium, in England, Hadrian's Wall is still part of that. I mean, you got those guys built some serious, civil engineering. They were good at what they did, absolutely. So that is, I think, why Sergius Paulus is so curious about this news that he's hearing, A, because it's getting spread around, and we also know that Paul will tell us that the Greeks just love talking. They love to hear anything new and exciting, and they'll sit around in the marketplace all day just hearing philosophy and cool ideas. I think that's why this guy, Sergius Paulus, he's like, whoa, we've got some people coming through town here who are from that area and can give us more information. Send for him. Bring him to me. I mean, he's the Roman governor of this whole island. And in fact, that's too much information. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, so he calls and says, yeah, come on in. But he's got this hanger-on at court named the Son of Jesus, the Son of Salvation, which is I don't think you should, I know you're automatically your mind is going to Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus is an incredibly common name in those days. It's not something unusual. It means God is salvation, and it's very, very common. No Jew would name their child that anymore. But you will not meet. Well, that's actually not true. What's that? Yeah, Mexicans do it all the time. That's true. But that's actually not true, because are there Jews who are called Joshua? Yeah. Yes, there are, and that is Jesus' name. But Yeshua, you won't hear that as a Jew's name, because that is directly the shortened form of Yehoshua, which is what Jesus was called. You will not find a Jew called Jesus these days. But in those days, tons of them. Elimas, no one has any idea how to translate that, what that means. It says that is how his name is translated, but which is weird, because we know how to translate Bar Yeshua. Bar is Aramaic for son, and Yeshua is salvation. So why would they then come along and say Elimas is this, because that's how his name was translated. Translated from what? Nobody knows what Elimas means. And you'll see in your Strong's Concordance or something that there's lots of speculation. So just throwing that out there. So he is definitely a stumbling block. And he gets this stinging rebuke from Paul, which is fascinating, because Paul got the exact same stinging rebuke at the beginning of this book for exactly the same reason. He was opposing the gospel and trying to shut it down. And Angela has already mentioned briefly regarding the similarities and the differences between this guy and Paul when he was stricken on the road to Damascus. Let's just walk through that for just a second, okay? First of all, Paul sees a light and is blinded with something that appears to be fish scales, and his friends take him by the hand and lead him into Damascus. This guy sees darkness and mist, no fish scales. They're both opposing the message about the Messiah Yeshua. Do you think Some have suggested, and I don't know how I feel about this, but some have suggested that Paul was actually operating on this principle that he was trying to save the guy. By blinding his physical eyes, he might open his spiritual eyes. I don't know. I mean, would you imagine that you would be impacted if you were, you heard somebody, before you got saved or whatever, you heard somebody sharing the message and you had a rebellious spirit and you were like, you're making fun of this guy who's sharing the gospel, and the guy looks at you and says, "You creep, will you not shut up? You're going to be blind now." And all of a sudden you're blind. That might change your opinion about the validity of this message. So some have actually suggested that perhaps Paul was operating on the principle of the way it happened for him, that God struck him physically blind so that he could become spiritually seeing and awake. Yes?
Was he a Jew?
It says that he was.
He was a Pharisee.
See, that would make
Who, Paul? Are we talking about Paul or Elymas?
Elymas.
Elymas was a Jew, yes.
So that makes sense, right? Because Paul says in Romans 9 that he wishes that he could be accursed for the sake of all of the people of Israel, so
True.
they may come to know.
Yeah, true that. So it's just something to think about. But it also reminds me, and none of us would do this, but maybe we should, to shut up a mocker. However, you also have to look in the Proverbs, which says, someone who comes against a mocker is just going to get a boot. You don't challenge a fool, because you just get scorn heaped on your head. But this guy is directly opposing the gospel message in Paul, and Paul is like, he stands up quite firmly. And I guess you have to use wisdom, but I've never known of any evangelist or minister who would be willing to say to a heckler or something, "You son of the devil, you just shut your mouth." There might be a place for that, I don't know. Try that out at your own discretion. Just kidding. So what's curious to me is that the proconsul in verse 12, it says that he is astonished at the message regarding the Messiah. He especially is astonished when he sees what happens to Elymas, his court fool. It makes you wonder, is he astonished about what happened to Elymas, or is he astonished about the message of the gospel, and why is he astonished? It says that he believed, but what is missing here? Because we have seen several examples of people hearing the message about Yeshua, but there are additional things that happen. In every single instance that we've seen so far, when people hear the message, a couple of different things happen. Can you think of anything that happens aside from, it says that they believed and what? Sometimes they are baptized. That happens immediately afterwards. Sometimes, what does it say else? They repent. They turn. So far, when we've heard the gospel message preached, it says that they believed and they were baptized, or they believed and they repented and they turned, but they believed and then they did something else. They said, "Brothers, what should we do with this information?" That doesn't happen with this guy. It just says that he believes. It doesn't say that he got baptized. It doesn't say that he turned from his sin. It just says he believed. What do you make of that? What does that remind you of?
Someone with little faith, someone who's just starting, basically the lights are just barely turning on.
Absolutely. Yeah, it could absolutely be that this person, that a seed was sown. And you don't want to necessarily say, because people, of course, will speculate, well, maybe he wasn't even saved. Maybe he just believed, and this is like the book of James kind of thing, where it's like he's got demonic faith. He believes and he just doesn't shudder. I don't know. Could be that he's just had that seed planted, and he's, clearly God ordained for this thing to happen. So I gotta go with the optimistic view of humanity, that maybe this guy had a seed planted and he's going to be ready to follow through in time when the Spirit works on him some more. So that's the curious part. Now, when they get to Antioch in Pisidia, they go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And this is what we've seen every single time so far as the message is being spread throughout the regions, and now it's branching outside of the regions of Judea and Samaria and the Galilee and going into the greater Roman Empire, that they're still going to the Jews in the synagogue. And that makes sense. And he says to them at the end of his sermon, we have to come to you first. Because Yeshua said, I have come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And the message comes from the Jews and to the Jews first, then to the nations. Okay, so, and it just makes sense that you want to go where, now you might think, well, why though? I mean, you're kind of preaching to the choir. Well, that's true, except that you've got a new revelation. These are all people who worship God. You've got Jews and proselytes and God-fearers in this congregation. They're already worshiping God. So that's naturally where you need to go because you have new information. Guys, we've been reading the Torah and the prophets all of these thousands of years, or 1,300 years so far. The promise has come true. The Messiah has arrived. And you notice, I wasn't going to deal with this until a little bit later, but you notice that so far, we don't have a lot of pushback by the Jews coming to hear this message and accept it. A lot of them do. In fact, at the end of this section, we have the Jews start to give in some pushback. But that's basically the first time, except from the leaders in Jerusalem at the very beginning of this book. Every time we go to a synagogue and we start preaching this message, the Jews just accept it. It just works. And they give glory to God, and they ask them to stay for a couple days, and they do, and everything's great, and then they move on. But now we're starting to get some pushback, but I want you to note why. Why are we getting pushback all of a sudden? Jealousy. They don't have a problem with the message. They have a problem with the people receiving the message. That is quite telling. The Jews are receiving the message. It's when the Gentiles begin to receive the message and come in en masse, that's when problems start. What do you make of that? Why do you think that is?
It's just like in the beginning with Moses, and when Moses picked up his wife, and they were mad because she was not part of the tribes, and his sister basically went after him, and then she was cursed.
Yep.
And it's the door's always been open. It's always been open, but the tribe of Israel, or the Jews and Benjamin, seemed to always want it for themselves, and didn't want to spread it for the world. And then the dispersia, the northern tribes were basically scattered everywhere. A lot of the proportions stayed in Israel, but a lot of them were sent out all over the places, and basically saying, hey, Yeshua was the guy that, he brought everybody back and he covenant the whole tribe.
Right. I totally could not agree with you more on that front. That's a really good insight. And I just think, it really speaks to the tension of, and I think it comes down to control. It always comes down to control. And it's going to come down to control as we continue to develop, especially in chapters 14 and 15. It comes down to control. The Jews, that circumcision faction of the Jews, which is insisting that the Gentiles cannot be saved unless they are circumcised, that is a matter of control. And you also have, for example, once the Hebrews had this religion of the way of the Messiah pulled away from them because they're outnumbered by Gentiles, the Gentiles far outnumber the Jews by literally, it's not very long. I mean, there's not that many Jews in the world at this time. There's not many Jews in the world now. What is there, like 14, 15 million of them? That is a super minority. A very tiny minority of the people on this planet are Jews. And it was true in that day as well. But they began to be vastly outnumbered by the Christians once the Christians figured out, this is awesome, we're in. That tension and infighting never stopped. It never stopped. And it became more and more intense until it separates. And we shouldn't be surprised. Our own religion of Christianity has 30,000 different denominations. We can't get along. And you can see that prophetically given in a shadow picture with Joseph and his brothers, with Jacob and Esau, with Isaac and Ishmael. There is always infighting among brothers. That's why God says that he believes that one thing is an abomination to him, as someone who causes dissension among brothers. That's a very hardcore thing. And I want you to recognize that the Jews seemingly wouldn't have a problem with Jesus if it wasn't for the Christians. And the Christians wouldn't necessarily have a problem with the Torah if it wasn't for the Jews. Do you see how we're screwing it up for each other? That you can see, and I know you've probably watched a debate between a rabbi and probably Dan Brown or whatever, Dr. Brown, Michael Brown. You know, I love the guy. But you listen to a Jew debate a Christian and they say the same thing every single time. Well, whatever you Christians say about your Jesus, we definitely know that's not our Messiah. Because our Messiah would not come along and throw our Torah out the window. Everything that the Jews are saying is a mischaracterization from the Christians. And all the trash that the Christians are talking about the Torah has strictly to do with Judaism. So we are ruining the message for each other. Their problem is with us, not really our Messiah, Jesus. If they were to just read what our book says about Jesus from their own mindset of knowing the Old Testament and knowing the prophets and knowing the writings and the Psalms, and they were to just read it from their own mindset, they would probably look at it and go, wow, this makes total good sense. And if we would just read the beginning of the book without attaching all of the trappings of Judaism to it, we would probably say, well, that just makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. It's one book. It's all unified. It all makes perfect sense. But we're ruining it for each other. And it just keeps happening that way. The tribes are not yet unified.
Still fighting.
We're still fighting. Thousands of years later, we're still fighting. But it's going to come to an end. It's going to come to an end, and we are going to begin to get along at some point. He's going to bring peace to us. We're going to learn to get along. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. I am going to go ahead and stop there so that we have some time to fellowship. Didn't really get into too much of the meat of this section. We got a lot to go, but we'll pick up on that next time. I thank you for your attention. Any comments, questions, or concerns before we pray and fellowship together? Awesome. Thank you so much.